illuminated by the COVID-19 pandemic, deprivation of resources, worsening gaps in health disparities, and denial of tribes continue to prevail in Indigenous peoples' lives. Racial bias, the leading cause of these issues, progressed in Canada and the United States. To put this into perspective, here are some statistics. In 2017, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, along with Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, conducted a survey with over 3,000 adults, most of which are part of minority groups. Out of this massive number, 342 were Native Americans, and the following graphs focus on them and today's subject. Figure 1 shows the percent of Native Americans that were discriminated against in different situations. Figure 2 focuses more on unfair police and court treatment received by Native Americans because of their race. Finally, Figure 3 highlights the percent of Native Americans that have personally experienced discrimination in the form of slurs, negative actions from others, and offensive comments, once again because of their race. In order to explain or comprehend such occurrences, we must look back at the history and dig deeper into these broader subjects. Today we have with us 3 specialists, Tasneem, Kira, and Gina, who will clarify and analyze these matters. Tasneem?
To start off, I would like to talk about the historical reservations. For instance, the Treaty of Hopewell, which was signed in 1785 by the representatives of the Congress and the Cherokee, Choctaw, and the Chickasaw people, was established to protect the indigenous people and set land boundaries. This, however, was broken because of the European settlers who started to intrude the land that belonged to the indigenous people. Likewise to this broken treaty, contemporary reservations are not in good shape either. The reservations created to support them and help them maintain sovereignty over their land are extremely inadequately managed. Their houses, for example, are overcrowded and poorly built. On top of this, although they have some sovereignty over their land, they still have to rely on the federal government for financial support. Speaking of reservations, unfortunately, the Canadian government is not able to provide their Indigenous communities with the right resources either. College students of Nunavut, for example, are facing complications while doing their classes online because of limited internet access. The pandemic is also preventing them from moving out of the reservations and living near their school. While college might seem like an escape or a new beginning in a new environment for many people, it is not the same for the Nunavut students because they cannot try to improve their community by gaining a higher education, and at the same time, they cannot leave their community to live a better life elsewhere.
That's very interesting, Tasneem. Thank you for that insight. Clearly, these are not issues that just suddenly solidified, but progressed, evolved over several decades. Today, they are present and not weakened as they should. Obstacles, sadly, are not news to the Indigenous people. However, the COVID-19 pandemic brought in a new type of hardship. I have to wonder, how has this impacted them? Here with us is Kira McCaig to expand on the subject.
With the U.S. being hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, Native Americans have been affected disproportionately. Navajo Nation is the largest tribe in the U.S., with more than 300,000 members, and as of February 21st, 2021, they have lost at least 1,144 people to the virus. According to the CDC, the mortality rate of Indigenous people is 1.8 times that of white people. They are also testing positive for COVID at 3.5 times the rate of white Americans. With more than half of Native Americans living in U.S. cities, they represent a disproportionate number of cases. In Phoenix, the city with the 3rd largest population of Native Americans, they make up 4% of total cases, while also being hospitalized at double the rate of the total population. Why is this? On average, the lifespan of Native Americans is 4.4 years less than the average lifespan of the U.S.'s all-race population. They are dying at higher rates than all other Americans from preventable illnesses such as diabetes, liver disease, and chronic lower respiratory diseases. Also, the Indian Health Services, or IHS for short, is vastly underfunded and understaffed. In order to match the expenses of healthcare spent on federal prisoners, the funding for the IHS would nearly have to double. While the IHS does not provide good enough healthcare to Native Americans, it does not provide any aid to unrecognized tribes. The U.S. federal government only recognizes 574 tribes, with more than 200 other tribes left without federal recognition, including the Chinook tribe in southwest Washington. They have 3,000 members and have not received any federal aid since the start of the pandemic. In addition to the lack of aid, no recognition means no reservation, no housing allowance, no clinics, no COVID testing supplies, and no vaccine allocations. In order to access vaccines, testing, and other resources, they need to rely on neighboring tribes, requiring them to drive 1 to 3 hours away. Because of the distance, many members of the tribe do not receive healthcare at all. During COVID, there's also been a spike in the number of Native Americans struggling with addiction problems, which is linked to the spike in unemployment. As an unrecognized tribe, they do not receive any support for these problems. The most recent COVID package relegated more than $31 billion to Native Americans, the largest financial aid to Indian country ever, but to recognized tribes only. With this money, these tribes will be able to start attacking some of the infrastructure problems that impact Native Americans, but unrecognized tribes will not have the same opportunity. While gaining federal recognition may seem like an easy fix as of right now, it is almost impossible. For years, the health and well-being of Native Americans has taken a backseat, especially of those in unrecognized tribes. The COVID-19 has served as a deadly reminder as to why that needs to change.
Thank you, Kira. Horrific how systems set up to protect all, care for all, be there for all, rarely stand for all. When truly paying attention to what seems like tiny little cracks on the surface end up being huge fractures. Next, Specialist Gina will be speaking about how we as a population and how they as systems may repair such extensive damage. We'll be back shortly after this commercial from the sponsor of today's episode, Phil's Bird Emporium.
Hi, welcome to Phil's Bird Emporium. We've got birds, lots of birds. Here we have Snowy, Penguina, Speckles, Ruffles, Hummer, and Steven. Okay. Also, so you can give us money, we'll give you a bird. We also got merchandise. See, check these out. Pretty cool, pretty fabulous. So come on down, and we're very proud sponsors of the news.
Call Birds Emporium at 88144.
Welcome back to TBKG News. As previously mentioned, our last speaker is Gina, who will be discussing reparations.
Thank you, B. Today, we are seeing Indigenous people from all over the world call for reparations for the hardships they continue to endure. For most, an apology is not enough. Indigenous peoples and allies demand for real change in the system. An apology is great, but what does it look like in terms of moving into action? Said Morningstar Gali, a member of the Pit River Tribe in Northern California. We're still here. We're still fighting for recognition. We're fighting for the protection of our sacred places. We're fighting for visibility. Though we have already explored some of the terrifying disadvantages that tribes in specifically North America face, a simple news story cannot even begin to scrape the surface of the abuse, discrimination, kidnappings, and murders that continue to happen to this day. How can we actually begin to repair the damage? Well, I'd say that the damage is done, but that does not mean that these people do not deserve action. Though we may not be able to reverse what we have done, we can give these innocent lives what they were intended to have all along. First, we can return their stolen land. For hundreds of years, Indigenous people's sacred land has been and still is taken from them, while they are placed in reservations that colonizers seem to believe are fair. We can improve the education system, tell the truth about Indigenous people, and the sacrifices they are forced to make each day. It is our duty to fix this system so that our children are not misinformed about what truly happens around them. We owe this to our future generations. And in terms of the pandemic, we owe Indigenous people, especially those in cities, a voice and equal access to healthcare. Urban natives are practically invisible as COVID-19 continues.
Gina, like you perfectly said, we cannot reverse the damage, but we can improve the lives of future generations. A big thank you to all of the specialists present with us today who aided in the understanding of struggles faced daily by Indigenous people. We will see you back again next week with our guest speakers, Tom Ato and Mac Roney. This is TVKG News.
Good night.
Good night.